Bonjour, bonsoir, dear friends, and happy new year. Even more importantly than a happy new year, healthy, successful, exciting, healing, and all of the above, thinking of your health and your sanity. So we are with a beautiful Marnie Old. She's all the way on the East Coast. Marnie is our director of Vin Enlightenment, the pleasure of life. You know, she's the absolute depth of knowledge on the world of wine and spirits and beer and food and many other topics, of course. But yes, today, as it's going to be Healthy Month, that's what we do in January, typically after all the excesses we've had. We're going to talk bubbles, we're going to talk calories, we're going to talk health, we're going to talk wine, what you should be drinking this month, and how we celebrate together a new year. Because for me, I need to tell you, I'm not slowing down at all on my bubble intake. On the opposite, I go high on bubbles.
I'm pouring myself at the same time, Jean-Charles.
Marnie, so excited to see you. I'm back on the continent to be with you. Cheers. So Marnie, what does it mean to you drinking in a healthy way?
Well, you know, I think wine, unique among the alcoholic drinks, really lends itself to healthy moderation because more so than beer, more so than spirits, more so than cocktails, wine craves food. It makes you hungrier. It makes you thirstier with each sip. And because it's a beverage for combining with a meal, it becomes more like a condiment, a sauce on the side, and less something that you would pound on its own. So to me, just the fact that wine has that high level of acidity and that dryness that makes you want it as a accompaniment for food rather than just as something to drink on its own makes all the difference in the way that people treat wine. It's one of the reasons that wine tends to have healthier outcomes as a beverage for so many people.
That's for sure. And maybe, Marnie, you want to stress to everyone today how important we all acknowledge, realize, and know that wine and sparkling wine is a very natural process. It's really simply the conversion of a fruit into its evolution, and the sugar converts into alcohol.
Exactly. So it is a whole food in that sense. We use the whole grape. We pull those grapes out of the vineyard and we transform them into something special. There's nothing really that's added in any significant way. The only thing removed is the stems and the seeds and the solids. What remains was the product of the vine, of the grape. And so in that sense, it's nature's juice. Like this was produced by Mother Nature in the vineyards themselves.
And dear friends, we always start with JCB 21. Today it's JCB 24. We're making a little exception to introduce you to a new wine, which is very exciting. But why bubbles? Besides the fact that we love bubbles, Marnie, explain all of us why is bubbles so essential to our balanced diet, morning, lunch, and dinner.
Well, it's funny. People think of December as the season for sparkling wine because of all the parties and New Year's Eve and popping corks and celebrations. And they sometimes scale back on sparkling wine in the month of January. But honestly, with so many people focused on losing weight and counting calories, this is the perfect time to be transitioning to drinking sparkling wines. There's a lot of misconceptions out there. People think that because there is some added sugar used in the production process for making sparkling wine, that must mean that it's unhealthy or fattening in some way. But of course, that couldn't be further from the truth. And if you like, I can show you, I can illustrate how that works for you by sharing my screen for a moment.
Would be phenomenal, Marnie. Thank you. And you all know with Marnie, we've written a book together. And we may embark into more creative writings and visuals and thinking because, dear friends, know that knowledge is power. Wine is something you intake with your meal, hopefully every day. And it's important that we all give you a maximum amount of knowledge so you can enjoy it responsibly, but at the same time with a great level of education. And Marnie is our resource. Every time I have a question, she's on a 24-hour, 7 days a week on my dial phone.
Well, luckily,
I
you
mean,
know
have a
enough about
party.
wine that that doesn't happen very often, Jean-Charles. But I'm going to share my screen and we're going to talk about bursting some bubbles, in this case, some urban myths about sparkling wine that we're going to puncture today and go through some fun facts on bubbles, because we do talk about this fairly often, but not always about this piece of it. There is, it's true, some measurable residual sugar that's present in all wines, and that comes from the natural grape sugar present in the grapes, as we mentioned a moment ago. And it is true that sparkling wines usually contain a tiny bit more sugar than other dry wines, more than your average Chardonnay or your average Pinot Noir or Cabernet Sauvignon. However, that doesn't mean that they are unhealthy. That added sugar that is used in producing almost sparkling wines does not make them more fattening than other wines. It doesn't give them more carbs. It doesn't make them something that you need to forego for the month of January, like great French desserts. Sugar is added twice in the production of a classic méthode champenoise traditional method sparkling wine like this Brut JCB number 24. First, we add a tiny bit of sugar to create the bubbles. And then at the very end, we add a tiny, tiny little splash of what we call a final sweetening dosage to the wine. That dosage tops up each bubble, every bottle of bubbles before the cork goes on. And that's what determines the final wine sweetness. Now, we have terms on the labels that tell you how much sugar is present in the wine. Brut is by far the most popular among our Boisset offerings, of course, and that is a really low level of added sugar at no more than 12 grams per liter. However, 12 grams per liter is a little higher than what you would find in a traditional white or red Burgundy or white or red wine from California that was fermented in a still style rather than bubbles. But let's unpack that for a minute. Because regardless of wine style, white, red, rosé, bubbles, alcohol is always going to be wine's largest source of calories by far. In your average glass of wine, you've got about 84% water, roughly 13.5% alcohol, and only half a percentage point of sugar. So even though sugar has calories, there's so little of it in a glass of wine, it doesn't really make much difference, especially since alcohol is considerably higher in calories, has almost twice as much per gram as compared to sugar. So if pure sugar is 4 calories a gram, pure alcohol contains 7 calories per gram. And that's why it's true that sparkling wines have fewer calories per serving than most other wine styles. That's what makes them a great choice when you're trying to watch your calorie intake or watch your weight, as so many people are doing in the month of January to start off the new year. And it's because even if they are sweeter, they do contain far less alcohol. And that is the key point.
Wow. Woo-hoo-hoo. So always look on the label for Brut or Extra Brut, and then you're below 12 grams per bottle equivalent. So it's not too bad. And you could see that we typically as well use cane sugar, which is a lot more healthy than all the sweeteners or sugars that you can find. A lot of the JCB wines as well, dear friends, are between 4 grams, some zero dosage, all the way to 10, 11. So we tend to stay way below that 12 gram bottle equivalent. Marnie, we're trying a great wine. Do you want to describe it for us?
Absolutely. JCB number 24 might not be as familiar to everyone as JCB 21, but it is like a sibling. It's a California sparkling wine that is a similar blend of Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, still produced through that traditional champagne method that gives you the deliciousness, the concentration of flavor, the kind of noticeable bread dough flavors or brioche aromas that we associate with champagne and sparkling wines from France, but can be executed in California as well, as long as they're done with patient aging. That is the key. And JCB number 24 is only available through our my.boissetcollection.com website or exclusively through your Boisset ambassador. The number 24 certifies that this is I think this is a 24 karat choice when it comes to your bubbles. I always like the number 24 and keep some in my fridge.
Well, you're saying keep in your fridge, Marnie. What is a good time and when is a good time to open bubbles? And I know you and I do it all day long, but what do you recommend?
Well, I come out of the fine dining universe in the world of restaurants, and we use sparkling wines to start any occasion. It doesn't matter if you're gathering for a brunch or gathering for a lunch or gathering for a cocktail party or gathering for a meal in the evening at dinner time. Sparkling wines are the way you start any gathering that involves food, because the carbonation wakes up the senses, scours the palate clean, and gets you ready to enjoy food. The acidity level makes your mouth water and makes everything you taste better. And to me, sparkling wines, there's no better way to start any event, because they change the mood. They have a social effect that is intoxicating as well.
Now, often in parties myself, I'm very consistent all night. I stick only with bubbles. What is the rationale behind mixing, not mixing? Mm-hmm. And what's your recommendation if you want to keep your head very clear and have a wonderful morning the next day?
Well, I have two tips for that, and they both involve hydration. So one of them is, when you are at an event, mixing back and forth between one style of wine and another style of wine isn't going to be as much of a problem as switching back and forth between wine and cocktails, or wine and whiskey, or wine and beer. All of those, because the whiskeys of the world are very high in the compounds present in oak barrels that are difficult for us to digest. They can cause headaches and histamine reactions. There are also challenges with beer, of course, because the starch present in beer gets treated as sugar by your body. And so for the same reason that sugary liqueurs can give you a hangover the next day, beer can do more of that as well. However, sticking to wine, you can go from sparkling to red and back again, no problem. If you'd like to keep your shirt clean and your teeth clean, bubbles are always a great choice. That's one of the reasons that so many people enjoy them at parties, is because even if you spill them, you're not going to make a mess. But the other reason is, of course, that they do have lower alcohol content on average than other wines. And that's why you, my friend, are very wise to stick to bubbles at only somewhere between 11.5 and 12.5% alcohol. Sparkling wines have among the lowest alcohol content of any popular wine style. For example, Chardonnays and Pinot Noirs, 13.5 to 14%. Some Cabernets up to 15%. Some Red Zinfandels up to 16, 17%. And that makes a huge difference once you add it up at the end of the night after a few glasses.
We've had amazing parties in the last 6 weeks of the year, 2021. Now we're going to be in 2022. We're planning a lot of great lunches and dinners exclusively with bubbles.
Yes.
Enlighten us, Marnie, about the diversity of food that bubble can really magnify and really pair with.
Well, I still remember early in my career as a sommelier in restaurants, there was a very traditional, older French sommelier at a very famous restaurant across the street from where I used to work, called Le Bec Fin in Philadelphia. And this gentleman, his reputation for wine selection was unparalleled in the city. And very early on, one of the things he said to me stuck with me. And he said, I was a new sommelier. I was asking his advice on pairing. And his first piece of advice was, when in doubt, choose champagne. And the reason for that is that the carbonation in sparkling wine overrides many of the clashes that you can get with other styles. For example, this sparkling wine has a level of alcohol and acidity and sweetness that's quite similar to a style like Chablis, for example, or a dry Sauvignon Blanc. However, it will partner better with foods than some of those wines, because the carbonation will mask there's a kind of toothpaste and orange juice reaction that you can get when there's sweetness present in food and you serve it with a high acid dry wine. And champagne, sparkling wines, Cremant de Bourgogne, all of our sparkling wines are immune to that problem. So when in doubt, believe it or not, champagne is probably your better choice. Your sparkling wines are going to taste just as good with a steak as they will with your shrimp cocktail, as they will with your salad, as they will with your chicken marsala.
So bubbles all day, all night?
Every day.
Yes. So, why do you think this 24 is so special? Because I'm a big fan of it. And typically I'm really, really towards our French bubbles. But in this case, it's phenomenal. It's rich.
Gorgeous. It's gorgeous. And part of it, I really do think, has to do with the patient aging period. Now, In France, there are very tight regulations on how long the wine must age on the lees in the bottle before it's disgorged. And so there's a mandatory minimum for non-vintage wines in Burgundy or Champagne. That's a minimum of 18 months. For vintage dated wines, it's 3 years. Here in the United States, many producers of sparkling wines are not required. There are no regulations on the aging, so they have to follow the methodology, but they don't have to have the same period of patience. Whereas luckily at Boisset, because of course all of our sparkling winemaking team members train in France and are very familiar with the benefits of long-term patient aging, seeing extra time on the lees in that aging period for this wine, even though it's a 2016, we are talking about a wine that has seen quite a long period of aging before disgorgement, and that is what gives it that palate richness, that weight, that gives it kind of the creamy texture rather than the kind of frothy effervescence you can get with younger sparkling wines that so often happen in California.
Another big question I keep getting via text or email, or even when I meet people as I serve bubbles, as you know, religiously every day, is temperature. Would you enlighten us as well on temperature?
Oh, sure.
And really the scale of it, because not always the colder is better.
It's true. And especially with higher quality wines like this one, generally speaking, it is true that sparkling wines tend to taste better a little cooler than traditional whites and rosés. However, when you're talking about a higher quality wine, a lower temperature reduces its ability to give you fragrance in the glass. And of course, so much of our perception of flavor is olfactory that can actually make the wine seem more muted on the flavor palette as well. So to me, when we're talking about high quality wines like these that we produce at Boisset, I generally will pull them out of the refrigerator 10, 15, even 20 minutes before I'm ready to serve them, because of course they feel quite refreshing when they're ice cold, but it's almost like you're choosing to anesthetize your senses and not getting the full flavor impact when they're served too cold.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for that, because, often I put it in the freezer 10 minutes before, I open it, let it sit for 10 minutes, and then the bubble takes full form, and it's very palatable then. So
it is. Absolutely. And that's what I love about your champagne glasses that you designed with Baccarat. They are wider. That's one of the reasons I use a standard white wine glass, since I don't have yours here in my studio. You need a little surface area to get that blooming aroma and to really get the full impact of the wine.
Well, I understand you have a red wine open as well.
I do.
So and as we stay within, Chardonnay Pinot family, you have the fabulous number 12. Ooh la la.
Exactly. JCB number 12. And of course, we did choose both of these because they happen to be exclusives. I mentioned to the my.boissetcollection.com website. So of course, we have a great offer on those this week, since all of our wines featured on the happy hour do usually have a special discount. So check out the website before midnight on Sunday to get a great offer. But the JCB number 12 is one of the most popular wines in our program. It is wildly popular because of something special that you do, Jean-Charles, with this wine that's a little different than so many of our Pinot Noirs. This is a wine that is, of course, made with 100% Pinot Noir, and that Pinot Noir is all grown in Sonoma County. But what I love about this is that because of the sensibilities of the JCB program, where you bring together sort of the best of both worlds, of the old world and the new, here, it's like you're working with California vineyards, but your interpretation is very French, very Burgundian. The wine sees a lot less new oak, and it's also, tell me if I'm wrong, the winemakers won't tell me because it's a secret, but it seems to me that you're harvesting the fruit just a little earlier, perhaps a week earlier on the JCB number 12 than you do on so many other styles. And what that does is it gives you perhaps a wine with a little less alcohol and maybe a smidge less power as well in terms of intensity, but it gives you nuance and complexity and more refreshment and earthiness that I just love.
And you wanted to bring it to this amazing lineup because you want to stay in the Pinot family as well?
Yes, yes. And I also wanted to talk about something that we don't talk about that often in the wine business, but there's this warning label on the back of all of our wines. It says contains sulfites, that just freaks people out. And especially when people are focused more in January after the new year, there's the highest focus of the year on being healthy. I thought maybe we could talk about this contains sulfites warning and help people understand that it doesn't quite mean what they might think it means.
Well, so you must dive into this because, what is so exciting, dear friends, is for the first time in our history, we've been working very hard. And I say working because it's a true diligent process to do exactly what Marnie just explained about making sure we don't add sulfite from what traditionally exists in fruits and vegetables endogenously in it. And the new wine we're releasing this year is a Blanc de Noir JCB 64. And you can see this is this gorgeous label that is
nice.
Very light blue sky, very extremely libertine colors of the early 18th century. You want to dive into that light ocean or you want to go into that sky and escape. And it's a wine, in fact, with no added sulfite. So Marnie, explain us what that means.
So let's talk about sulfites because there is so much misunderstanding about sulfites in wine. I'm going to have to share my screen again just to be able to give you guys a quick tour about sulfite myths and what's true and what's not. So we're going to give you some fun facts here on wine and health that center on sulfites. And that sulfite warning label that I just showed you on the back of the label can lead people to assume that sulfites are dangerous chemical additives. But there is a lot of misunderstanding about the nature of sulfites in wine and in food. In reality, sulfites are naturally present in all fermented foods, not just wine, but also cheeses, any kind of, all the fermented stuff they're telling us that's good, like the probiotics, like kimchi and yogurt and kefir. These are all loaded with naturally produced sulfites that are essentially generated during the fermentation process. But of course, there is also naturally sulfite present in the grapes when we pull them from the vineyard. You could have organic grapes and they would still have measurable sulfites present because there are sulfites in the soil that are drawn up into the plant, expressed into the fruit, and become present in the wine as a result. In fact, we are, as human beings, there are naturally sulfites present in our own bodies. Sulfites are not the kind of scary preservative that a lot of people think they are. They've been used for thousands and thousands of years. However, sulfite warnings are only printed on wine labels, for some reason, not on foods that contain far higher levels of sulfite. So for example, meat and fish, eggs, cheese, tea, cocoa, coffee, and especially when we start getting into things like pickles, dried fruits, for example, raisins, dried apricots have some of the highest measured levels of sulfites in the foods that we eat, but none of those are required to carry a sulfite warning. And that's because the contained sulfite warning was a result of the anti-alcohol crusades of the 1970s. It was a political battle that was taking place at that time with an organization leading the charge called the Women's Christian Temperance Union that fought really hard they wanted alcohol to be banned actually, but they succeeded in getting a sulfite warning on the bottle. But let's talk about sulfites. Sulfites are natural. Sulfites are also something that we have known in winemaking are essential to hygienic fermentation and have been used for thousands of years. We know that the ancient Greeks, the ancient Egyptians, when they were fermenting wine, they would light a candle inside the barrel or inside the fermenting vessel to, of course, for them, they thought they were dispelling evil spirits or something like that. But really what they were doing was releasing small amounts of sulfite from the candle flame that would coat the inside of the vessel and act to suppress unwanted microbiological spoilage, because that's what sulfites are all about. Now, we do have different ways of using sulfites now. We no longer do this with candles in a barrel to flame purify a fermentation vessel, but they are still needed because what sulfites do is that they kill microorganisms like unwanted bacteria, molds, types of yeast that are not desirable in terms of the result that we're looking for when we're making wine. And they also do something else. They prevent oxidation very, very efficiently. That's why we use them in dried fruits. They prevent browning in wine, which is, of course, the road to spoilage. Now, in fact, if we use no sulfites at all in winemaking, or worse, use a centrifuge to spin them out, because that's the only way to make a truly sulfite-free wine, most wines will oxidize, start to brown and degrade in a matter of months. The fact that they're able to be preserved, that they have the long life that they do, that they've had for centuries in wine culture, is thanks to the use of sulfite in winemaking. But there has been a few wrinkles just in the modern era of the last 150 years that have led them to sort of get a bad reputation. And it's true that sulfites are certainly a health concern for some people, and honestly, a real concern. But it's really only those who have an actual sulfite allergy, which is a very, very, very small fraction of the population. And we do have two ways that sulfites can be used in winemaking. The way we use them at Boisset is the traditional method, the way that almost all fine wine producers around the world use it, which is to use a tiny amount, just a tiny pinch of sulfite being added to the grapes when they arrive at the winery in order to suppress those negative microbiological elements before fermentation process begins. However, it's true that mass producers, those who are making industrial scale wine and selling it in bags and boxes for cheap bulk wines, they are absolutely doing the same thing, adding a little sulfur at the beginning of the winemaking process. But the scary part is what they're doing after the wine is finished, especially if you're making a sweet wine and want to prevent it from spoiling or browning in the bottle. What they're doing is that they're adding more sulfites after fermentation. And that's when you get very high levels in the finished wine, because there's a big, big difference in the results depending on which of these two methods that you use. When you add sulfites pre-fermentation, the way we do, the way most high quality wine producers do, almost all of those sulfites either settle out or are filtered out before bottling, so that the result of sulfite content in the wine is somewhere in the 25 to 75 milligrams per liter level. Whereas if you dose the wine after fermentation, the way bulk producers, the way cheap wine producers do, you get a much, much higher level, all the way up to 350 milligrams per liter, which is very, very different in terms of sulfur content in the final wine. So let's just kind of dig down into the actual real scoop on sulfites and health, though, for a moment. There are sulfite reactions that those who are sensitive with an allergy will have if they encounter wines that have high levels of sulfites. Those reactions are generally experienced as respiratory symptoms, though, similar to asthma, things like coughing, shortness of breath, difficulty breathing, chest pain, or wheezing. This is not what most people think the problem is with sulfites, though, because if you think about it, most people think, oh, the headache I have after drinking wine, that's caused by sulfites, or oh, the hangover I have after drinking wine, that's caused by sulfites, or the heartburn, or whatever the case is. That is not what's going on, but people do focus on sulfites simply because that warning is on the back label. In very rare cases, there are a few people that can have hives, can break out in skin reactions, or have a full anaphylactic shock reaction to sulfites. Those people already know who they are. Those are the folks who can't eat a pickle or put sour cream on their taco or have a handful of raisins without breaking out, right? However, for the vast majority of people, the experiences that they have, the reactions they have to drinking wine are related to something else. Sulfites just do not cause headaches. We know this from extensive medical research. The main culprits are drinking too much alcohol, having a histamine reaction, which is usually more often in red wines or those wines that are aged in oak barrels. Perhaps you have a tyramine sensitivity, which can also be triggering of headaches, but most often it's simply dehydration, drinking alcoholic drinks and forgetting to drink your water. Now, sulfites also do not cause heartburn, which is one of the second most frequently reported issue with wine. The main culprits are the fact that wine has naturally high levels of grape acidity, which are nothing wrong with the wine. It's just something that some people have difficulty digesting. And especially those with reflux problems, alcohol can irritate the esophagus and stomach too. And then finally, sulfites also do not cause flushing. Some people get that flushing reaction, the rosy cheeks, the red nose, and the main culprits for that are that alcohol does expand blood vessels, and existing conditions like rosacea can be exacerbated by alcohol. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen because I can hear you laughing, Jean-Charles. This is something we don't talk about enough in the wine business. There are so many people who are worried about getting those reactions from wine from sulfites, and that's not the cause at all.
Oh, so well said. Marnie, exceptional presentation of sulfite. And that really introduced a new fresh, extremely aromatic, and what I love in what you've explained, it really portrays exactly one of the words we have, be behind the JCB 64 is alive. The wine is alive with no sulfite added.
Untamed, unchained.
That's it. So are you excited about this new edition?
Very much. I have a sample on its way to me now, Jean-Charles, since it just arrived in the country in the last week or two, but I have not yet tasted it. So I'm very excited.
Fantastic. Well, Marnie, thank you so much for so much enlightenment, health, calories, obviously no sulfites, what to drink, when to drink it, how to serve wine. And I wanted to remind everyone, we have this amazing decanter, you know, which really helps, right? You use it all the time, Marnie. Explain why it helps so much.
I love the decanter for sparkling wine. And even people in the wine trade are just flummoxed by the idea of why you would decant a sparkling wine into another vessel, because in their mind, they're thinking about all the carbonation that gets lost in that process. When you pop a cork, of course, you lose a certain amount of pressure and carbonation. When you pour it into the glass, you lose a certain amount of bubbles. And it's true that when you do pour into the decanter, you do generate and lose some of that carbonation as well. But as long as you're drinking the whole bottle tonight, that's really not a problem. And in fact, a benefit. There is a textural change that happens in wines when you release some of the excess carbonation, where you get away from the kind of prickly bubbles into the softer, creamier bubbles. And this is a benefit that you normally have to lay your sparkling wine away and age for years or decades to achieve, because the same effect comes about through long-term aging. What happens is that the carbonation gets locked into liquid solution and has a hard time disentangling itself from the molecules of liquid. And what happens is you get a softness. The wines, if you look at the very best, 10 years on the lees, the tête de cuvée wines of Champagne, you'll notice that they don't foam up the way a younger non-vintage brut would, or the way a cava or a prosecco would. They have a very discreet carbonation and bubble to them. And when you put them in the mouth, it feels like you're drinking, like you're rolling pearls around in your mouth. It's a very different textural effect. And that's what you get from using that decanter as well.
Rolling pearls on your tongue. That's a fabulous way to close this amazing time together, Marnie. Thank you so much. Happy New Year to you and your family, all our circle of friends. We have more JCB bubbles than ever before. And now a new edition, number 64. So it's so exciting. Dear friends, have a great time. Keep drinking. You know, there's less alcohol in bubbles, less calories, and your head will always remain light all night. So join us, and we'll have Marnie in a few weeks again talking about bubbles more.
Yes, fantastic. Thank you, Jean-Charles. And it's always a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Santé, everyone.